Mark Helprin, you and I have had the exotic pleasure, along with our friend Angelo Codevilla, of being called superhawks by Norman Podhoretz, the longtime editor of Commentary. He was criticizing our countercultural views about the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And now that we've had 9 years since the beginning of the Iraq War, and a little bit longer, 10 years, I suppose, since the beginning of the war in Afghanistan, I wonder if you'd favor us with some thoughts on how it went, and have we won?
Even though it is, in some circles, not popular to say that we have lost, but clearly we have lost. I mean, for instance, in Iraq, the tide was supposedly turned by the surge. This is a matter of conservative superstition, that there was a surge and we tied it. If you look at a graph of the numbers of troops, you'll see that the surge was simply surged up to the previous highest level of troops, and for a fairly short time. That conceals something, which is this: that in Afghanistan, in Iraq, the largest number of troops that we had was actually dwarfed by the number of contractors. Whereas we had 160,000 at the peak, there were 340,000 if you include contractors. That further reduces the amount of the surge from about 8% to around 4.5%. So that surge was essentially nothing. It was coincident with two other things, however. One was that we abandoned the roads. If you look at a graph of the air activity, air supply of fire bases and remote bases, you can see that the Air Force stepped in and increased its activities by orders of magnitude, literally orders of magnitude, because we decided to airlift everything to all our bases, and we surrendered the roads. And the Air Force at that time increased its operations by orders of magnitude, airlifting all of our supplies and personnel to the remote fire bases and other bases in Iraq, so that we would not have to deal with the IEDs or other such attacks. And that in itself was a surrender. At the same time, the Sunni decided that they would ally with us. And so essentially our enemies became our allies, which anyone who fights in the Middle East knows that this kind of thing happens, especially in Afghanistan, where they're the champions of that. It's happening right now.
And we paid them well to switch sides.
We began to pay and arm the people that we were killing and who were killing us, and they were motivated by the fact that the Shia had taken over the government, as they have now. So we didn't win in that respect, and we have retreated, leaving a nation that is hostile to our interests in the Middle East and presumably elsewhere. Which is divided in three, as it was when, actually it wasn't really divided when we invaded it. It was unified under terror. Yeah. And it will probably be unified under terror again after a civil war, although the Kurds might be exempted. In Afghanistan, when we're speaking now, as this is being filmed, we are seeing the Afghans turn against us, which is nothing new because they never really were for us. We deal with people in the population who are the elite, who are oftentimes American educated, who have things to gain, who know what it's like to circulate in Washington and Paris and London. And we take that for the country. But it isn't the country. The country of 25 million people is hostile to us, and you cannot subdue a country of 25 million people with 100,000 troops. It's impossible. It's impossible. Then you take sides in a civil war, and what happens is the same thing that happened in Vietnam, that happened in Iraq, and it's happening in Afghanistan. We have lost. We have lost these two wars. Eventually, we will understand that. We didn't need to lose them, you see. That was our point at the CRB. And for that, for talking about the unpleasantness of that, the course that we were taking, that's why Norman was angry at us. And by the way, Norman and I have made up because of the things that lie ahead in which we see eye to eye. Let me just explain that my background in the Middle East is different from most other people's. You have in Washington, You have either people who know absolutely nothing about the Middle East and nothing about the military, and they're the ones, by the way, who, of course, who run our policy, our military policy in the Middle East. And then you have the people who do know something about the Middle East and know nothing about the military. And often they are Arabists, because that's how we train our Middle East specialists. And they've gone native, and their sympathies are very peculiar, I think. Or we have people who know about the military, or partially know about the military, and know nothing about the Middle East. So there's a gap there. The Arab Middle East, and even the Islamic world, is divided up into so many different compartments that in a sense, stabilizes it, even though they're all on fire, and they're all shifting, and they're all moving, but they're contained because they will always fight the person nearest to them. As you can see now, it's a mosaic of different little flaring wars. So this dissipates the overall energy. That's in our favor. It's very important. The second thing is that in Islam, and Islam means essentially submission or resignation, but it's two types of submission. You make your enemy submit, and because they divide the world into two parts: Dar al-Islam, which is the world of submission, the Islamic world, and the Dar al-Harb, the world of war. And if you submit like that, it has a dual meaning. It's not just that you make your enemy submit, it's that you also yourself submit. You submit to fate. You submit to Allah. And what happens is they undergo seasons and moods where they rise up, and they have the Islamic conquest, the rise of the Mahdi in Sudan, etc.
So religious revivals feature as one of the normal
a flip
tides
back
of affairs.
Yeah. A flip back into fatalism. This can be triggered. It was triggered after the '67 war. It was triggered with the defeat of the Mahdi in the Sudan. It can be triggered easily because that's one of their set modes. And this is going to happen too. They will tire of fighting among themselves, and then also they will go back into essentially plan B, which is it's the will of Allah, and there will be a period of quiescence. So I don't think of it as something which is building like a giant snowball and can only go in one direction.
So this isn't world historical, some inevitable
not
new
inevitably
force that must be
not inevitably.
prevented.
The one thing that see when they were nation states after in the post-colonial period, when they adopted the model of the European nation state, then there was less fragmentation and more central direction, so they could on occasion come together and act in unison, such as in the '67 war, and in '73 with the oil boycott supporting the Egyptians and the Syrians in the '73 war. They could do it more easily then. Now, with the sort of transformation into the non-existent ummah, you know, the community of Muslim believers, which doesn't really work on a transnational scale. With that, there will be less effective, and this is something that we don't have to worry about.
You
that
put
much.
it very harshly or decisively, I suppose, when you say that we've lost these wars.
The battles, anyway, Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
But have we, how would you say this, taught them nothing? I mean, they have had to, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, they have sustained enormous prices for the American military actions and the ensuing occupation. Is there no inhibitory effect of that left in those countries? Do you think?
No.
Are they not at least somewhat intimidated from a repeat of 9/11?
No.
Let's say?
No, I'm going to explain why. Another analogy, which is the karate analogy. I used to take karate, of course, everyone did. And one thing that you were taught was if you're going to break through a board, you have to have sufficient force to break through it. Otherwise, if you don't, you will injure your hand.
Yes.
See, so this is what we did not do. We did not push hard enough, fast enough, and in the right way. We could have done that had we adopted a more intelligent strategy to flip them into this fatalism that I'm talking about. Meanwhile, what we've taught them is that you can take on the United States and not only survive, but humiliate the United States, cause tremendous disruption in our country, more or less discredit our arms. And it works. And eventually, and then what happens after, to them, a very short span, 4 or 5 years, 8, 10 years, we then leave. And we leave it to them. So it's not something that I think will inhibit them too much. But what I wanted to say was, the one thing that we have to be very careful of, which can unite the Ummah and allow them to act in unison and really give them a push, is if they obtain nuclear weapons. Specifically Iran, because Iran is trying to become the leader of the Islamic world in the same way that Nasser did in Egypt after the Bandung Conference. That will change the equation, because that puts them on a different level vis-a-vis Western, specifically American military power. That's the one thing now that we really should be on the lookout for more localized reasons, which is what they could use it for at the moment, and vis-a-vis international relations. But as you mentioned, in broader historical terms, that is the magic stone. That if they have that, then what I've been saying has to be modified, and you're in a different situation.